In today's heartwarming story, a poor child stumbles upon a discarded box of toys from a wealthy family, only to discover something truly shocking inside. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and if you'd like to support our content creation, please consider donating through the link in the pinned comment. Now, let's dive into this incredible tale. On a chilly autumn evening, 8-year-old Ezra shuffled along the sidewalk, his worn-out sneakers scuffing against the concrete. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the affluent neighborhood, a stark contrast to the rundown apartment complex where Ezra lived with his single mother, Lydia. As he made his way home from his after-school job of delivering newspapers, the scent of warm, home-cooked meals wafted from the grand houses, making his empty stomach growl. Ezra's eyes wandered to the perfectly manicured lawns and gleaming luxury cars, a world away from his own reality of second-hand clothes and meager meals. He often dreamed of what it would be like to live in one of these houses, to have a room filled with toys and gadgets, to never worry about whether there would be enough food on the table. As he turned a corner, a commotion caught his attention. Outside an imposing Victorian-style mansion, a well-dressed couple stood supervising as workers loaded boxes into a moving truck. Ezra slowed his pace, curiosity piqued by the flurry of activity. He noticed a young girl, about his age, watching from an upstairs window, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. Suddenly, one of the workers stumbled, dropping a large cardboard box. Its contents spilled onto the driveway, a cascade of toys, books, and colorful objects that made Ezra's eyes widen with wonder. The well-dressed man, presumably the father, waved his hand dismissively. "Just leave it," he called out. "We're decluttering for the move. Donate it or throw it away, I don't care." Ezra's heart raced as he watched the worker hastily gather the items, stuffing them back into the box. As the man carried it towards a nearby dumpster, Ezra's feet moved of their own accord. He approached the worker, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir," Ezra said, his fingers twisting the hem of his threadbare shirt. "If you're throwing that away, may I have it?" The worker glanced at Ezra, then at the house. The couple had already gone back inside, leaving the workers to finish up. With a small smile and a wink, he set the box down in front of Ezra. "Knock yourself out, kid," he said before returning to his work. Ezra's hands trembled as he reached for the box. It was heavier than he expected, filled to the brim with discarded treasures. He managed to drag it a short distance away from the house, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he began to open the lid, a voice called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" Ezra froze, looking up to see the young girl from the window now standing at the edge of the driveway. Her curly red hair bounced as she approached, curiosity evident in her bright green eyes. I was just..." Ezra stammered, unsure if he was in trouble. The girl's gaze softened as she took in Ezra's appearance. His too small clothes, the smudges of dirt on his face. She looked at the box, then back at Ezra, a small smile forming on her lips. "It's okay," she said. "I'm Penelope. What's your name?" "Ezra," he replied, his voice barely audible. Penelope knelt beside the box, her designer dress pooling around her. "Let's see what's inside together, shall we?" With trembling hands, Ezra opened the lid, unaware that this simple act would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. As Ezra and Penelope peered into the box, their eyes widened with wonder. The contents were far more than just discarded toys. They were a treasure trove of memories and possibilities. Ezra's hand reached in, pulling out a weathered leather-bound book. Its cover was embossed with intricate golden designs, the title reading, "The Atlas of Impossible Places." "I remember this," Penelope exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "My grandfather gave it to me before he passed away. I can't believe it ended up in this box." Ezra carefully opened the book, revealing beautifully illustrated maps of fantastical locations. Each page was filled with handwritten notes and sketches in the margins, detailing adventures and discoveries. As they flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out, fluttering to the ground. Penelope picked it up, her brow furrowing as she unfolded it. It's a letter from my grandfather," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Penelope read the letter silently, her eyes filling with tears, Ezra continued to explore the box. He found a vintage camera, its brass fittings gleaming in the fading sunlight. Next came a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Inside were various trinkets, a compass, a set of skeleton keys, and a peculiar coin with unfamiliar markings. "Ezra, look at this," Penelope said, her voice trembling with excitement. She handed him the letter, and as he read, his heart began to race. The letter spoke of a hidden inheritance, a treasure that Penelope's grandfather had concealed before his death. He wrote of a series of clues, each leading to the next, ultimately revealing the location of something that would change everything. The first clue, he wrote, was hidden within the pages of the Atlas of Impossible Places. Ezra and Penelope looked at each other, a mixture of excitement and disbelief on their faces. "Do you think it's real?" Ezra asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Penelope nodded slowly. "My grandfather was an explorer and a bit of an eccentric. If anyone would set up a treasure hunt, it would be him." As they began to search through the book for the first clue, a stern voice called out from the house, "Penelope, it's time to come inside." Penelope jumped to her feet, looking panicked. "I have to go," she said quickly. "My parents can't know about this. They wouldn't understand." Ezra nodded, understanding all too well the complexities of family expectations. "What should we do?" he asked, gesturing to the box and its contents. Penelope bit her lip, thinking quickly. "Take it," she said finally. "All of it. Keep it safe. Can you meet me here tomorrow after school?" Ezra nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. As Penelope rushed back to her house, Ezra carefully repacked the box, his mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events. With great effort, he managed to drag the box home, sneaking it into the small bedroom he shared with his mother. As he hid it under his bed, he could hardly believe what had just transpired. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps his life could change. That night, as Ezra lay in bed listening to his mother's soft snores, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of hidden treasures, secret maps, and the mysterious Penelope. He wondered about her life, so different from his own, and yet they were now bound together by this extraordinary discovery. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the threadbare curtains, Ezra made a decision. Whatever this treasure hunt might lead to, he was determined to see it through. Not just for himself, but for Penelope, and for the memory of her grandfather who had set this all in motion. Little did Ezra know that this decision would set him on a path filled with danger, discovery, and a truth that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. The following day crawled by at an agonizing pace for Ezra. His mind wandered during classes, filled with visions of secret maps and hidden treasures. As soon as the final bell rang, he raced to the affluent neighborhood, his heart pounding with anticipation. Penelope was already waiting at the corner where they had met the day before. Her red curls were pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a private school uniform that probably cost more than all of Ezra's clothes combined. Despite their obvious differences, her smile was warm and genuine as Ezra approached. "Did you bring the box?" she whispered, glancing around nervously. Ezra nodded, patting his worn backpack. "I couldn't bring everything, but I have the book, the letter, and some of the other items." Penelope's eyes lit up. "Perfect. I know a place where we can look at everything without being disturbed." She led Ezra through a series of back alleys and overgrown paths until they reached an abandoned greenhouse at the edge of a large estate. The glass panes were dirty and cracked, but the structure still stood firm. Inside, nature had begun to reclaim the space, with vines and wildflowers growing amongst rusted gardening tools. As they settled on a relatively clear patch of floor, Ezra couldn't help but ask, "Won't your parents be worried about where you are?" A shadow passed over Penelope's face. They're not really the type to notice," she said softly. "Besides, we're leaving for Europe in a few days. This might be our only chance to figure out what my grandfather was trying to tell us." Ezra nodded, understanding the weight of unspoken words. He pulled out the Atlas of Impossible Places, and they began to pore over its pages, searching for any hidden clues. As the afternoon light filtered through the grimy windows, they discovered small anomalies, a series of letters underlined throughout the book, strange symbols in the margins, and pages with nearly imperceptible pinpricks. "Wait, look at this," Penelope said, pointing to a map of a place called the Whispering Caverns. "These markings, they're not part of the original illustration. I think my grandfather added them." Ezra leaned in, squinting at the tiny dots and lines. "It looks almost like a code." They spent the next hour trying to decipher the markings, jotting down ideas and theories. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the greenhouse, they realized they had only scratched the surface of the mystery. "We need more time," Penelope said, frustration evident in her voice. "But I leave in 3 days, and after that," she trailed off, leaving the implications hanging in the air. Ezra bit his lip, an idea forming in his mind. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but the pull of the mystery was too strong to ignore. What if I came with you?" he suggested hesitantly. Penelope's eyes widened. "Me to Europe? But how? My parents would never allow it." "Not officially," Ezra said, his heart racing at the audacity of his own plan. "But what if I could stow away, on the ship or plane or whatever you're taking? Once we're there, we could continue the search together." For a moment, Penelope looked shocked. Then, slowly, a mischievous grin spread across her face. "That's crazy," she said. "Absolutely insane." She paused, her green eyes glinting with excitement. "Let's do it." As they began to formulate their daring plan, neither Ezra nor Penelope noticed the shadowy figure watching them from outside the greenhouse, a figure that had followed them from Penelope's house, listening to every word, and was now slipping away to make a phone call that would set in motion a chain of events neither child could have anticipated. Back in the greenhouse, Ezra and Penelope were too engrossed in their scheming to notice the fading light or the chill that had begun to seep into the air. They were embarking on an adventure beyond their wildest dreams, unaware of the dangers that lay ahead or the powerful forces they were about to encounter. As night fell, they finally parted ways, promising to meet again the next day to finalize their plans. Ezra walked home, his mind buzzing with excitement and fear. He knew he should feel guilty about the idea of running away, of leaving his mother behind. But the pull of the mystery, the promise of a life-changing discovery, was too strong to resist. Little did Ezra know that his decision to stow away, born from a child's sense of adventure and the desperate hope for a better life, would have consequences far beyond anything he could have imagined. Forces were already in motion, and the true nature of the treasure and of Ezra's own identity was about to be revealed in a way that would shake the foundations of his world. As Ezra made his way home that evening, his mind whirling with plans and possibilities, he failed to notice the sleek black car that slowly cruised past him. Inside, a man with steely gray eyes watched the boy intently, speaking quietly into a phone. "Yes, sir. The boy has made contact with the girl. It appears they've discovered something in the old man's belongings." He paused, listening. "Understood. We'll continue to monitor the situation." Meanwhile, Ezra arrived home to find his mother, Lydia, sitting at their small kitchen table, her face lined with worry. "Ezra, where have you been? I was so worried." Guilt washed over Ezra as he realized how late it had gotten. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was helping a friend with a project." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Lydia's eyes softened, but there was something else there. a flicker of fear that Ezra couldn't quite understand. "Ezra, honey, sit down. There's something I need to tell you." With a growing sense of unease, Ezra sat across from his mother. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a worn envelope on the table. "I received this letter today," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about your father." Ezra's heart skipped a beat. His father had never been part of his life. Lydia had always told him that he died before Ezra was born, but the look on his mother's face told him there was more to the story. "Your father, he isn't dead, Ezra. He's been in hiding, protecting us." Lydia's voice cracked. "And now, he says it's time for us to know the truth." As Lydia began to explain, Ezra's world tilted on its axis. His father, James Holloway, had been a brilliant archaeologist and explorer. During an expedition in Eastern Europe, he had stumbled upon evidence of an ancient artifact of immense power. But he wasn't the only one searching for it. A dangerous organization was after the artifact, Lydia continued. "Your father went into hiding to protect us and to continue his research in secret. He thought it would only be for a short time." Ezra's mind reeled. "But it's been 8 years. Why now? Why tell us this now?" Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "Because he says he's close to finding it, and he needs our help." As Ezra tried to process this earth-shattering revelation, a memory surfaced. Penelope's grandfather, the explorer, the hidden clues. Could it be connected? His heart raced as he considered the possibilities. "Mom," he said slowly, I think I might know something about this." Ezra told Lydia about the discarded box, about Penelope and the strange book filled with clues. With each word, Lydia's face grew paler. "Oh, Ezra," she whispered, "you have no idea what you've stumbled into." Just then, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Lydia rose, her movements tense, and peered through the peephole. She gasped, quickly undoing the locks, and a desperate longing he hadn't known he'd been carrying all these years. James Holloway stepped into the tiny apartment, closing the door behind him. "I know you both must have 1,000 questions," he said, "but we don't have much time. The people who've been chasing me, they're closing in. And now, they're not just after me. They're after you too, Ezra." "Why?" Ezra managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. James knelt before his son, placing his hands on Ezra's shoulders. "Because, my boy, you're the key to everything. The artifact I've been searching for, it can only be wielded by someone of a specific bloodline, our bloodline." As the weight of this revelation settled over the room, a car engine roared to life outside. James rushed to the window, his face grim. "They're here," he said. "We need to leave. Now." In that moment, as his mother scrambled to grab essentials and his long-lost father ushered them towards the fire escape, Ezra realized that his life would never be the same. The adventure he had longed for had arrived, but it was far more dangerous and complex than he could have ever imagined. As they slipped out into the night, Ezra couldn't help but wonder about Penelope. Was she safe? Did she have any idea of the storm that was about to engulf them all? Little did he know, Penelope was facing her own startling revelations, ones that would soon bring their paths crashing together in ways neither of them could have anticipated. As Ezra and his parents fled into the night, across town, Penelope was facing a crisis of her own. She sat in her father's opulent study, her hands trembling as she clutched a photograph she'd found hidden in the back of her grandfather's atlas. The photo showed her grandfather standing next to a man who looked remarkably like an older version of Ezra. On the back, written in her grandfather's familiar scrawl, were the words, "James and I, on the brink of the greatest discovery in human history. May this knowledge be protected until the right time comes." Penelope's mind raced. Could Ezra's family be connected to her grandfather's secret? Before she could ponder further, the study door burst open. Her father, Penelope's shock must have shown on her face because her father's expression softened slightly. "Oh, Penny," he sighed. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself involved in." Just then, Penelope's mother, Evelyn, rushed into the room. "They've found him," she said breathlessly. "James Holloway. He's here in the city." Alexander's face paled. "Then we have no time to lose. Penelope, you're coming with us. Now." As her parents bustled her out of the house and into a waiting car, Penelope's mind whirled. Who was James Holloway? Why did that name sound so familiar? Across the city, Ezra, Lydia, and James were navigating the shadowy back alleys, constantly looking over their shoulders. James led them to an abandoned warehouse, ushering them inside. "We'll be safe here for a little while," he said, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "I have some equipment stashed here that we'll need." As James rummaged through hidden compartments, pulling out maps, strange devices, and what looked like ancient scrolls, Ezra finally found his voice. "Dad," he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "What's going on? Who's after us? What's this artifact you've been searching for?" James paused, looking at his son with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "It's called the Chronos Stone," he explained. "Legend says it has the power to manipulate time itself, but it's not just a legend, Ezra. It's real, and it's incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands." Aunt Lydia placed a hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Your father has been trying to find it before others could, to protect it." "But why am I the key?" Ezra asked. Remembering his father's earlier words, James knelt before Ezra, his eyes intense. "Because, son, we are descendants of an ancient line of guardians. The stone can only be activated by someone with our blood." Suddenly, a noise outside made them all freeze. James motioned for silence, creeping towards a grimy window. His face hardened as he peered out. "They've found us," he whispered. "We need to move, now." But as they turned to flee, the warehouse door burst open. In strode Alexander Rothschild, flanked by men in dark suits, and there, half hidden behind her father, was Penelope, her eyes wide with shock as she saw Ezra. "James," Alexander said, his voice dripping with false warmth, "it's been a long time, old friend." James pushed Ezra behind him protectively. "Alexander, I see you're still doing the organization's dirty work." Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come now, James. You know as well as I do the power the Chronos Stone holds. Think of what we could achieve with it." "At what cost?" James shot back. "The stone isn't meant for us to wield. It's too dangerous." As the adults argued, Ezra and Penelope locked eyes across the room. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever was happening, they were in it together. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. "I'm afraid you're all too late." Everyone turned to see an elderly man step out of the shadows. Penelope gasped. "Grandpa?" The old man smiled sadly. "Hello, my dear. I'm sorry it's come to this." He held up a glowing, pulsing stone. "The Chronos Stone has already been activated, and now we must all face the consequences of our actions, past, present, and future." Before anyone could react, a blinding light filled the warehouse. Ezra felt a tugging sensation, as if reality itself was being torn apart. The last thing he saw before everything went white was Penelope reaching out to him, fear and determination etched on her face. As the light engulfed them all, Ezra realized that their adventure was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and it would take them to places and times beyond their wildest imaginations. When the blinding light finally faded, Ezra found himself lying on cold, damp grass. He blinked, disoriented, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light of dawn. As he sat up, he realized with a jolt that he was no longer in the warehouse. In fact, he wasn't even in the city anymore. Rolling hills stretched out before him, dotted with ancient stone structures. In the distance, a circle of massive standing stones loomed against the misty horizon. With a start, Ezra recognized it from his history books. Stonehenge. "Ezra?" A familiar voice called out. He turned to see Penelope running towards him. Her clothes changed to what looked like medieval attire. "Are you okay? Do you know where we are?" Before Ezra could respond, a groan nearby caught their attention. James was slowly getting to his feet, looking around with a mixture of awe and concern. "It worked," he muttered. "The stone actually worked." "Dad?" Ezra called out. "What's going on? Where are we?" James turned to the children, his face grave. "Not where, son. When? If I'm not mistaken, we've traveled back in time, to ancient Britain, around 2500 BCE. Penelope gasped. "That's impossible. Time travel isn't real. Is it?" "I'm afraid it is, my dear," came another voice. Penelope's grandfather emerged from behind one of the standing stones, the Chronos stone glowing faintly in his hand, and it's far more dangerous than any of us realized. As they gathered together, James explained rapidly, the Chronos stone didn't just allow travel through time, it had the power to alter the very fabric of history. In the wrong hands, it could be used to reshape the world according to someone's whims, erasing entire civilizations or creating new ones. "That's why it must be protected," James said, "and why the organization wants it so badly. But where are the others?" Ezra asked, suddenly realizing his mother and Penelope's parents were nowhere to be seen. A look of concern crossed James' face. "The stone's power must have scattered us across different time periods. We need to find them before the organization does." Just then, a rumbling sound filled the air. The standing stones began to vibrate, and a swirling vortex of energy appeared in the center of the circle. "It's a time portal," Penelope's grandfather explained. "The stone is showing us the way." As they approached the vortex, James turned to the children. "Listen to me, both of you. What lies ahead will be dangerous. The organization will stop at nothing to get the stone. But you two have a special connection to it. Ezra through his bloodline, and Penelope through her grandfather's research. Together, you may be our best hope of setting things right." Ezra and Penelope looked at each other, a mix of fear and determination in their eyes. Despite the enormity of the task before them, they both felt a sense of purpose they'd never known before. "We're ready," Ezra said, grasping Penelope's hand. With a nod, James led them towards the portal. "Remember," he said, "history is fragile. Whatever you do in the past can have huge consequences for the future. We must tread carefully." As they stepped into the swirling energy, Ezra felt a tugging sensation. Images flashed before his eyes. Great pyramids rising from the desert, Roman legions marching, knights charging into battle, great sailing ships exploring uncharted waters. When the world stopped spinning, they found themselves in the midst of a bustling Renaissance city. The smell of spices and the sound of multiple languages filled the air. Colorful banners hung from ornate buildings, and artists worked on scaffoldings, painting frescoes on church walls. "Florence," James breathed. "Late 15th century, if I'm not mistaken." But before they could get their bearings, a commotion erupted nearby. A group of men in dark robes were chasing someone through the crowded streets. As the pursued figure drew closer, Ezra's heart leapt. It was his mother, Lydia. "Mom!" he cried out, starting towards her. James grabbed his arm. "Wait. We can't just rush in. Remember, we're in the past now. We need to be careful about how we interact with events." As they watched helplessly, Lydia disappeared down an alley, her pursuers close behind. The weight of their new reality settled heavily on Ezra. They were lost in time, separated from loved ones, and pursued by a powerful organization. But as he looked at Penelope, saw the determination in her eyes that matched his own, he knew they wouldn't give up. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever twists history might throw at them, they would face it together. "So," Penelope said, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice despite the danger, "how do we save your mom without accidentally erasing ourselves from existence?" Ezra couldn't help but smile at her spirit. As James and Penelope's grandfather began to formulate a plan, Ezra realized that their adventure was far from over. In fact, it was about to become more incredible and more perilous than he could have ever imagined. The narrow streets of Renaissance Florence bustled with activity as Ezra, Penelope, James, and Penelope's grandfather carefully made their way through the crowd. They were following the direction Lydia had fled, all while trying to blend in with the locals. "We need to find Mom without drawing attention to ourselves," Ezra whispered, his eyes darting from face to face in the crowd, searching for any sign of his mother or her pursuers. James nodded grimly. "And we need to be careful not to interfere too much with the timeline. Even small changes could have catastrophic effects on the future." As they turned a corner, they nearly collided with a man in elaborate clothing, his face partially hidden by an ornate mask. The man stumbled, dropping a leather-bound notebook. "Mi dispiace," Penelope said quickly, stooping to pick up the book. As she handed it back, her eyes widened in recognition. "Wait, you're Leonardo da Vinci." The man's eyes crinkled in amusement behind his mask. "Indeed I am, young lady. But how do you know me? I don't believe we've met." Before Penelope could respond, her grandfather stepped in smoothly. "Your reputation precedes you, maestro. We are travelers, interested in your work." Leonardo studied them curiously. "Travelers, you say? Your clothing and manner of speech are most unusual. Perhaps we could discuss this further in my workshop." James opened his mouth to decline, but Ezra suddenly grabbed his arm. "Dad, look," he hissed, pointing discreetly down the street. Two men in dark robes were questioning passers-by, showing them what looked like a sketch. Even from a distance, Ezra could make out his mother's face on the parchment. "We'd be honored to visit your workshop, maestro," James said quickly, recognizing the need for a hiding place. Leonardo led them through a maze of alleys to a cluttered studio filled with half-finished paintings, strange mechanical devices, and stacks of notebooks covered in mirror writing. As he closed the door behind them, his demeanor changed. "Now," he said, his voice losing its affected tone, "perhaps you can tell me who you really are and why you're being pursued by the Brotherhood of Time." The group exchanged shocked glances. You know about them?" Penelope asked. Leonardo smiled wryly. "My dear, there is very little that escapes my notice. I've had my own encounters with the Brotherhood. They seek to control history, to reshape it according to their vision, and they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals." As Leonardo spoke, Ezra's mind raced. Could this legendary genius be an ally in their quest? But before he could voice his thoughts, a commotion outside caught their attention. Peering through a gap in the shutters, Ezra saw his mother being dragged down the street by the robed men. "We have to help her," he cried, reaching for the door. James caught his son's arm. "Ezra, wait. We can't just rush out there. We need a plan." "Perhaps I can be of assistance," Leonardo interjected, a mischievous glint in his eye. He moved to a large object covered by a cloth in the corner of the workshop. With a flourish, he pulled the cloth away, revealing a contraption of wood, canvas, and gears. "My latest invention," he announced proudly. "A flying machine," Penelope gasped in awe. "The ornithopter, but I thought it was never successfully built." Leonardo raised an eyebrow at her slip but didn't comment. Instead, he turned to James. "This may be our best chance to rescue your wife without being seen. The Brotherhood would never expect an attack from the sky." As they quickly formulated a rescue plan, Ezra felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They were about to attempt a daring rescue with one of history's greatest inventors, using a machine that wasn't supposed to exist yet. The weight of their responsibility, to save his mother and protect the timeline, pressed heavily on him. Penelope must have sensed his anxiety because she reached out and squeezed his hand. "We can do this, Ezra," she said softly. "Together." Ezra nodded, drawing strength from her confidence. As they prepared to launch Leonardo's untested flying machine into the skies of Renaissance Florence, He knew that whatever happened next would change the course of their adventure, and possibly the course of history itself. Leonardo threw open the workshop's large windows and gestured to his creation. "Shall we take to the skies and make history?" he asked with a grin. As they moved to position the ornithopter, Ezra couldn't help but wonder, what other legendary figures from the past might they encounter on their journey through time? And how would these encounters shape the future they were fighting to protect? The cobblestone streets of Florence fell away beneath them as Leonardo's ornithopter took to the sky, its canvas wings flapping rhythmically. Ezra clung tightly to the wooden frame, his heart racing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Beside him, Penelope's eyes were wide with wonder, while James and Leonardo worked the controls with focused determination. "There!" Penelope shouted over the wind, pointing to a group of dark-robed figures hurrying through a less crowded area of the city. In their midst, Ezra could make out his mother's struggling form. Leonardo skillfully guided the flying machine lower, using the buildings for cover. "We'll only have one chance at this," he called out. "Are you ready?" Ezra nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. As they swooped down towards the street, James produced a smoke bomb, another of Leonardo's inventions, and hurled it at the Brotherhood members. In the ensuing chaos, Ezra and Penelope leaped from the ornithopter, landing in a roll as Leonardo had instructed them. Lydia's eyes widened in shock as she saw her son. "Ezra, how?" "No time to explain, Mom," Ezra said, grabbing her hand. "And we need to go." As they ran towards the waiting ornithopter, now hovering just above the ground, an angry shout rang out behind them. One of the Brotherhood members had broken free of the smoke's confusion. "The stone!" he yelled. "They must not escape with it." Ezra felt a tug on his jacket and turned to see the man's hand grasping at him. In that moment, time seemed to slow. He saw the desperation in the man's eyes, felt the weight of the Chronos stone in his pocket, and made a split-second decision. With a quick motion, he pulled the stone from his pocket and tossed it to Penelope. "Get to the ornithopter," he shouted, before turning to face their pursuer. "Ezra, no!" Lydia cried out, but James was already pulling her towards the flying machine. Penelope hesitated for a moment, torn between escaping and helping her friend. But she saw the determination in Ezra's eyes and understood. Clutching the stone tightly, she ran to the ornithopter. As the Brotherhood member lunged for Ezra, the boy ducked and weaved, using the skills he'd learned from years of navigating crowded school hallways. He led his pursuer away from the others, buying them time to escape. Just when it seemed Ezra would be caught, a hand reached down and pulled him upward. He found himself being lifted into the air by Leonardo's ornithopter, his father's strong grip securing him. "Hang on!" Leonardo shouted, as he steered the machine higher into the sky. As they soared away from the angry shouts below, Ezra finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked around at the faces of his rescued mother, his determined father, the brilliant Leonardo, and Penelope, who beamed at him with a mixture of relief and admiration. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish," James said, but there was pride in his voice. Lydia hugged Ezra tightly. "My brave boy. But how is any of this possible?" As they flew over the beautiful cityscape of Renaissance Florence, Ezra and the others began to explain their incredible journey to Lydia. Leonardo listened with fascination, his mind clearly racing with the implications of time travel. "So, the Brotherhood seeks to control history itself," Leonardo mused. "A noble goal, perhaps, but a dangerous one. The tapestry of time is delicate. Pull one thread, and the entire fabric may unravel. That's why we need to find the others and stop the Brotherhood," James said. "But where, or when, do we go next?" As if in answer, the Chronos stone in Penelope's hand began to pulse with an otherworldly light. A swirling portal of energy opened in the air before them. "It seems the stone has a destination in mind," Penelope's grandfather said, speaking for the first time since their daring rescue. Leonardo's eyes sparkled with curiosity and excitement. "Well, my new friends, it appears your journey is far from over, and I find myself rather reluctant to bid you farewell just yet." Ezra looked at the others, a question in his eyes. Could they risk bringing one of history's greatest minds with them through time? Before anyone could voice concerns, Leonardo deftly steered the ornithopter towards the portal. "Come," he said with a grin. "Let us see what wonders and dangers await us in the streams of time." As they approached the swirling vortex, Ezra felt Penelope's hand slip into his. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. With a final look at the Renaissance city below, the unlikely group of time travelers plunged into the unknown. The ornithopter, never meant to fly beyond its own time, carried them into a new adventure. As they hurtled through the time vortex, Ezra couldn't help but wonder, what new marvels would they witness? What dangers would they face? And how would the addition of Leonardo da Vinci to their group change the course of history? The time vortex spun around them in a dizzying whirl of colors and fragmented images. Ezra clung tightly to the ornithopter's frame, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Leonardo's eyes were wide with wonder, drinking in the impossible sights of history unfolding and rewinding around them. Suddenly, the vortex spat them out, and they found themselves hurtling through a night sky illuminated by strange, glowing structures that stretched up into the clouds. The ornithopter, buffeted by unfamiliar winds, began to spiral downward. "Brace for impact," James shouted, as Leonardo struggled with the controls. They crashed onto a gleaming platform jutting out from one of the towering structures. As they untangled themselves from the wreckage of the flying machine, Ezra helped Penelope to her feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She nodded, brushing off her clothes, which now looked comically out of place in their new surroundings. "Where are we?" she breathed, gazing around in awe. "When are we?" might be the better question, Lydia said, helping James up. Before anyone could speculate further, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Halt! Identify yourselves and state your temporal origin." They turned to see a group of figures approaching, clad in sleek, shimmering uniforms. Each carried what appeared to be some kind of advanced weapon. Leonardo stepped forward, his natural curiosity overcoming any sense of caution. "Fascinating. What manner of devices are those? The metallurgy alone must be..." James quickly pulled him back as one of the figures raised their weapon. "We mean no harm," he said, raising his hands. "We're travelers. We've become a bit lost in time." The lead figure lowered their weapon slightly, cocking their head. "Unregistered time travelers? That's a serious offense. You'll need to come with us for questioning and temporal quarantine." As they were led into the gleaming building, Ezra whispered to Penelope, "I think we're in the future. Far in the future." Penelope nodded, her eyes darting around, taking in every detail. "Look at the architecture, the technology. This must be at least the 22nd century, maybe later." They were brought to a sterile white room where a stern-looking woman in an official-looking uniform awaited them. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she scanned each of their faces. "Impossible," she muttered, before composing herself. "I am Temporal Agent Kira Zhang. You are in violation of at least a dozen time travel regulations. Explain yourselves." Over the next hour, they recounted their story, the Chronos Stone, the Brotherhood of Time, their accidental journey through history. Agent Zhang listened intently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "If what you're saying is true, then the situation is far more serious than we realized. The Brotherhood of Time has long been a thorn in our side, but we had no idea they had roots so far in the past." "Our side?" Ezra asked. "Who are you exactly?" Agent Zhang sighed. "We are the Temporal Preservation Agency. Our job is to protect the integrity of the timeline, to prevent paradoxes and unauthorized changes to history. But lately, we've been fighting a losing battle against chrono-terrorists who seek to reshape time to their will. Leonardo, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "My dear lady, it seems to me that your agency and our little group share a common goal. Perhaps we could be of assistance to one another." Agent Zhang studied them thoughtfully. "It's highly irregular, but these are desperate times. Your unique perspectives from various points in history could be invaluable." Just then, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Another agent burst into the room. "Sir, we've detected a massive temporal disturbance. It's as if entire sections of history are being erased." Ezra felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at Penelope, saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. What had the Brotherhood done? Agent Zhang's face hardened with resolve. "It seems we have no choice. You're hereby deputized as temporary temporal agents. We need to act fast to preserve the timeline." As they were quickly outfitted with futuristic time travel gear, Ezra's mind raced. They had started this journey as ordinary kids caught up in an extraordinary adventure. Now, they were being asked to help save all of history itself. Leonardo was examining the sleek time travel device strapped to his wrist with unbridled enthusiasm. "To think." "Ready," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. As Agent Zhang input coordinates into their devices, Ezra reached out and took Penelope's hand. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever twists and turns history might throw at them, they would face it together. With a flash of light and a rush of temporal energy, they vanished from the future, plunging once more into the swirling currents of time. Their mission: to preserve the past and save the future, no matter the cost. The group materialized in the midst of chaos. They found themselves on a barren landscape, the sky above them a swirling maelstrom of temporal energy. Fragments of different time periods collided and merged around them. A Roman chariot galloping past a World War II tank, prehistoric creatures roaming alongside futuristic robots. "The timeline is collapsing," Agent Zhang shouted over the cacophony of displaced time. "The Brotherhood must have activated a temporal resonance device. It's tearing apart the fabric of history." Ezra's eyes widened as he saw a familiar face in the distance. "Look, it's Alexander Rothschild." Sure enough, Penelope's father stood atop a hill, surrounded by Brotherhood members. In his hands, he held a device pulsing with the same energy as the Chronos Stone. "We have to stop him," Penelope cried, starting forward. James held her back. "Wait, we need a plan. If we just rush in, we could make things worse." Leonardo, his eyes alight with the brilliance of inspiration, spoke up. "Perhaps what we need is not to destroy the device, but to harmonize with it. To create a temporal counterpoint, if you will." Agent Zhang nodded, understanding dawning on her face. "Of course, if we can generate an opposing temporal field, we might be able to stabilize the timeline." "But how?" Lydia asked, ducking as a displaced pterodactyl swooped overhead. Ezra felt the Chronos Stone pulse in his pocket. He pulled it out, its glow matching the rhythm of the Brotherhood's device. "I think I know," he said, his voice steady with newfound determination. As the group quickly formulated a plan, Ezra and Penelope prepared to face the greatest challenge of their young lives. With Leonardo's genius, Agent Zhang's future tech, and the wisdom of their parents and Penelope's grandfather, they had a fighting chance. The final confrontation was a blur of action. Ezra and Penelope, protected by a temporal shield created by Agent Zhang, raced towards Alexander Rothschild. James and Lydia provided a distraction, while Leonardo used a hastily constructed device to disrupt the Brotherhood's defenses. As they reached the hilltop, Ezra held out the Chronos Stone, its power linking with the Brotherhood's device. Penelope faced her father, her eyes pleading. "Dad, please, this isn't the way. We can't control time. We have to respect it." For a moment, Alexander hesitated, the madness in his eyes flickering. It was all the opening they needed. Ezra activated the Chronos Stone, channeling its power through himself and Penelope. Their connection, forged through their incredible journey, amplified the stone's energy. A blinding light engulfed everything. For a timeless moment, Ezra felt as if he could see the entire tapestry of history laid out before him. Every thread, every connection, every possibility. When the light faded, the chaotic landscape had vanished. They stood in a peaceful meadow, the timeline restored. The Brotherhood members, including Alexander, looked around in confusion, the temporal madness leaving their eyes. Agent Zhang approached, a rare smile on her face. "You did it. The timeline is stable. History is safe, for now, at least." As the group celebrated their victory, Ezra and Penelope shared a quiet moment. "So, what happens now?" Penelope asked, her hand still in Ezra's. Ezra looked around at their unlikely team of time travelers, brilliant minds from the past, present, and future, all brought together by an incredible adventure. "I'm not sure," he said with a smile, "but I have a feeling our journey is far from over." Leonardo, overhearing them, grinned widely. "My young friends, we have all of time and space before us. The real question is, where and when shall we go next?" As they gathered to decide their next adventure, Ezra realized that their lives would never be the same. They had become guardians of time, protectors of history, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bonds strengthened by the threads of destiny that had brought them together. The Chronos stone glowed softly in Ezra's hand, a reminder of the power and responsibility they now held. As they prepared to embark on their next journey through time, Ezra knew that their greatest adventures were still to come. And so, the story of Ezra, Penelope, and their time-traveling companions doesn't end here. It merely opens the door to countless new beginnings, scattered across the vast tapestry of time.